Lena, Marissa, and Dana were three sisters whose lives seemed ordinary from the outside. But behind closed doors, their bond with their stepbrother Kyle grew into something dangerous, forbidden, and ultimately deadly. What began as a secret thrill quickly spiraled into jealousy, betrayal, and a crime so shocking it tore their family apart and left their small town haunted forever. Lena was the oldest of the three sisters, a girl who often carried the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Marissa, the middle child, was bold and restless, always searching for attention. Dana, the youngest, was quiet, often overlooked, but secretly the most observant. The three grew up in a home that had been broken once before. Their father's death left a void, and when their mother remarried, they hoped life would become easier. With the new marriage came a boy named Kyle, their stepbrother, who moved into the family home. At first, Kyle was just another presence in the house, a stranger who shared their kitchen table and their living room. But slowly he became something far more dangerous. Kyle was older than the sisters, and his confidence set him apart. While their mother and stepfather worked long hours, he lingered around the house. The sisters noticed him watching them, and instead of feeling uneasy, they grew curious. They found themselves competing for his attention in subtle ways. Lena would sit longer than necessary in the living room when he was there. Marissa would make excuses to bump into him. And Dana, though quiet, never missed a moment to observe. The boundaries between family and something darker blurred without anyone speaking of it. It began with secrecy, small moments that no one outside the house would notice. A shared glance, a brush of the hand, a moment of silence that felt heavier than words. The sisters felt they had discovered something forbidden and thrilling. Something only they shared with Kyle. They believed that as long as no one found out, it would remain their secret world. They were wrong. The secrecy drew them closer together at first. They created unspoken rules, unspoken agreements that allowed all three of them to be connected to Kyle at the same time. It was twisted, but in their minds it was a bond. The three sisters believed they were united by something special, something no one else could understand. But the truth was that jealousy and obsession were already festering inside them. Lena wanted control, Marissa craved attention, and Dana longed for the closeness she had always lacked. They each wanted Kyle for themselves, but none dared to admit it openly. Life outside their home carried on as though nothing was unusual. Neighbors saw the family as ordinary. The sisters attended school, smiled at friends, and walked the streets of their small town like any other girls. But behind closed doors, their lives were far from normal. They shared something so forbidden that even they struggled to understand it. The house became a cage of secrets, and the sisters began to live two lives, one for the world and one for themselves. The tension in the house grew heavy as the months passed. Their mother was often too distracted by work to notice the subtle changes in her daughters. She saw them becoming more private, locking their bedroom door, whispering in corners, and avoiding her questions, but she thought it was just teenage behavior. Their stepfather was no better. He trusted too easily, failing to see what was happening under his roof. Kyle used this blind trust to his advantage, drawing the sisters deeper into his world while maintaining the image of a quiet, well-behaved stepson. The three sisters convinced themselves that they were in control. They believed their secret gave them power, that no one could take it from them, yet cracks were already beginning to show. Arguments began to erupt between Lena and Marissa, each accusing the other of spending more time with Kyle. Dana, though silent, started keeping notes in a journal, writing down every detail of their shared life, every moment she wanted to remember. The journal became dangerous evidence of what they were hiding, though she didn't realize it yet. What truly bound them together was fear. Fear of being discovered, fear of losing Kyle, and fear of being judged by a world that would never understand. They told themselves lies to survive. They believed their bond made them stronger, that they were untouchable. They believed Kyle would never betray them, and that they could keep the world outside forever. But secrets are never safe, not when more than one person holds them. The sisters began noticing how closely neighbors watched them. People in small towns were always curious, always suspicious of anything unusual. Their closeness to Kyle started drawing quiet whispers. When the sisters walked with him, People stared longer than usual. When they defended him too strongly in casual conversations, people raised their eyebrows. The sisters told themselves it was all in their heads, but the weight of suspicion was creeping closer each day. Lena, who had always been the most cautious, started to feel the danger first. She noticed how her mother's eyes lingered when she entered the room. She noticed how Marissa couldn't hide her smirk when Kyle was around. She noticed Dana writing in her journal at night, scribbling with intensity, and she began to worry. What if one of them slipped? What if one of them told? The thought terrified her, but it also planted seeds of mistrust. Marissa, in contrast, craved the thrill. She liked the danger, the secrecy, the thought that she had something no one else did. She didn't fear discovery as much as Lena. Instead, she feared being left out, feared that Kyle would favor one sister over the others. This fear pushed her into recklessness, into making mistakes that would draw attention. She began staying out late, bragging to friends in ways that were subtle but dangerous, testing how far she could go without being caught. Dana, quiet as always, carried the heaviest burden. Her journal was filled with secrets that could destroy all of them if discovered. She wasn't reckless like Marissa or cautious like Lena. She was obsessed. Her attachment to Kyle ran deeper than the others realized, and she began to imagine a future where he was hers alone. She never said it, but her silence carried a dangerous intensity. The stage was being set for a collapse none of them could see. The sisters believed their secret bond was unbreakable, that their connection to Kyle gave them strength. But the truth was that their secret had already begun to consume them. What tied them together would soon tear them apart. Every look, every word, every jealous thought was a step closer to disaster. The story that began with curiosity and thrill was already turning into something darker, something that could no longer be hidden. Their home was no longer just a house. It had become the center of a secret so dangerous that it was only a matter of time before the outside world discovered it. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. Marissa was the first to sense that the outside world was closing in. She noticed the way neighbors looked at them when they walked together with Kyle. It wasn't the ordinary glance one gave a family passing by. It lingered, carrying suspicion, as though people could sense something strange beneath the surface. At school, whispers began to follow her. Friends asked why she was so protective of Kyle, why she seemed more attached to him than to anyone else. Marissa brushed it off, laughing nervously, but inside she felt the pressure building. Didn't he realize that every nervous laugh and every defensive remark only added to the curiosity of those watching? Lena carried the weight of responsibility as she always had. She tried to control the situation, urging her sisters in subtle ways to act normal, to be careful, to not give anyone a reason to ask questions. But the more she tried to manage them, the more reckless they became. Marissa grew impatient with her warnings and started acting out, while Dana withdrew into her secret world with her journal, writing down thoughts that could ruin them all. Lena watched helplessly as the balance they had created began to fall apart. The tension at home grew thicker by the day. Their mother noticed small changes she couldn't explain. She saw the sisters whispering when Kyle entered the room. She noticed the way Marissa's face lit up when Kyle spoke. She saw Lena grow anxious and protective whenever she asked questions. The mother didn't understand what was happening, but she felt something was wrong. She began to search for answers, and the sisters felt her eyes on them like a shadow that never left. One evening, their mother found something that deepened her suspicion. In the laundry basket, she discovered a shirt of Kyle's, stained in a way she could not ignore. It wasn't dirt or food, it was something more intimate, and it terrified her. She said nothing to the girls, but from that moment on, her trust in her daughters began to crack. The sisters sensed the shift. They felt her watching, questioning silently, and it made their secret feel even more dangerous. Outside the family, rumors had already started to spread. A neighbor once heard a heated argument coming from inside their home. Voices rose in anger, sharp and unrestrained, and though the words weren't clear, the tone was unmistakable. Arguments between sisters were common, but this one carried a strange intensity, and the neighbor's curiosity grew. Soon after, that same neighbor noticed Marissa walking late at night with Kyle, their closeness looking nothing like that of step-siblings. It only took one story told to another neighbor, one whisper carried through the small town, for rumors to spread like fire. The sisters knew they were being watched, but they couldn't help themselves. The secret had turned into an addiction. The more dangerous it became, the more reckless they were willing to be. Marissa, craving attention, flaunted her closeness with Kyle in small, subtle ways that only fueled suspicion. Lena tried desperately to cover their tracks, but her controlling nature made her look nervous and guilty. Dana, though quiet, betrayed them without realizing it. She carried her journal everywhere, clutching it as though it contained her very soul, never letting it out of her sight. The people around her noticed, and curiosity about what she was hiding began to grow. The jealousy between the sisters grew unbearable. Lena, always the leader, wanted to keep Kyle for herself when she felt Marissa was getting too close. Marissa, craving more than she was given, pushed boundaries further. Dana, though silent, began to dream of a time when she would no longer have to share. They started arguing more often, their words sharp and cruel, their unity crumbling under the weight of envy. What once felt like a shared secret now felt like a competition none of them could win. The atmosphere inside the house became unbearable. Meals were tense, silence heavier than conversation. Their stepfather remained oblivious, working long hours and trusting the girls too much to ever imagine what was happening. Their mother, however, grew restless. She began asking questions that cut deeper, questions that made Lena sweat, Marissa snap, and Dana retreat into silence. She didn't have proof yet, but her instincts told her something was very wrong. One night, things came to a breaking point. A loud argument broke out between Marissa and Lena, their voices echoing through the house. Dana sat quietly, her face pale, clutching her journal as if it were a shield. The argument grew so loud that neighbors once again heard it, this time certain it wasn't a normal sibling fight. The sisters shouted accusations at one another, each one betraying more than they intended. Their mother, listening in shock from the hallway, began to piece together the fragments. She didn't have the full truth, but what she heard was enough to convince her that something terrible was happening in her home. The sisters realized too late that their arguments had become dangerous. They had allowed jealousy and suspicion to crack their fragile unity. Lena feared Dana's silence the most, worried that her youngest sister would reveal everything in her obsession. Marissa, in her recklessness, had already exposed too much to friends at school. Dana, though outwardly quiet, had left behind written evidence in her journal that could destroy all of them. They were all liabilities to one another now, and the bond that once united them was turning into a trap. Fear began to consume them. Fear of discovery, fear of betrayal, fear of each other. Each sister believed the others might give away the secret first. That fear began to twist into something darker, something more violent. They started to think not only about how to protect their secret from outsiders, but also how to protect it from each other. The sisters who once believed they were bound forever now saw one another as threats. The world outside grew louder with whispers, and the world inside their home grew sharper with suspicion. The pressure was unbearable, the walls of secrecy closing in tighter each day. The sisters had created something they couldn't escape, something that was no longer thrilling but suffocating. What started as curiosity had turned into obsession, and obsession was leading them into a darkness none of them could control. The stage was set for a tragedy that would shock everyone who thought they knew the family. Marissa was never good at carrying secrets. She wanted to believe she was strong enough to hold the weight of what she and her sisters had done, but the pressure ate at her every day. The whispers at school followed her wherever she went, and the questions from friends never stopped. They wondered why she was so close to Kyle, why she defended him so fiercely, why her loyalty to him seemed stronger than to anyone else. At first, she laughed it off, brushing their suspicions aside. But one night, when the weight of it all became too much, she let the truth slip to someone she trusted. It was supposed to be a confession whispered in confidence, but that single act cracked their entire secret wide open. The friend she confided in wasted no time. What Marissa thought would be safe quickly spread through small circles, whispered from one ear to another, until half the town had some version of the story. It was never told the same way twice. Some said Kyle and one sister were too close, others hinted it was all three, but the point was the same, the family was hiding something unnatural. Rumors in small towns have a way of becoming fact before anyone can defend themselves. The sisters didn't know it yet, but their lives were unraveling. The first to feel the shift was Lena. She always paid attention to details, and she noticed when people began staring longer, when their mother's questions became sharper, when their stepfather grew uneasy without even knowing why. She blamed Marissa, suspecting her sister had said something reckless. That suspicion ignited another round of bitter fights between them. Their voices rose at night, their words cutting deeper, and every argument left Dana sitting in silence, scribbling furiously in her journal as though she were recording their downfall piece by piece. The walls of the house became suffocating. Every corner carried the weight of secrets. Every room felt like a place where something had gone too far. Their mother grew more suspicious with each passing day. She had no proof, but she sensed the truth lurking beneath their behavior. She found herself watching the girls constantly, studying their movements, listening to their whispers. The tension poisoned everything, and Kyle, once confident, began to unravel under the pressure. He paced through the house with paranoia, his temper short, his eyes darting as if he expected someone to burst in and expose them at any moment. It wasn't long before the rumors reached their mother. A concerned neighbor, perhaps pretending to be helpful, repeated what they had heard. The mother was horrified. At first, she refused to believe it, but the evidence of her own eyes was undeniable. The way her daughters clung to Kyle, the way they argued over him, the way the air in the house changed when he entered a room. She confronted them with questions, desperate for answers, but none of the sisters gave her the truth. Lena grew defensive, Marissa snapped in anger, and Dana retreated into silence as usual. That silence only deepened the mother's fear. The sisters thought denial would protect them. They believed that if they stuck together and refused to admit anything, the world outside would eventually move on. But instead of fading, the rumors grew louder. Marissa's friend, the one who had betrayed her, spread the story to more people, adding her own exaggerations to make it dramatic. Soon, it was no longer whispers in the hallways of school or quiet conversations among neighbors. It was a story that defined them, one that followed them wherever they went. The sisters were trapped. They couldn't silence the gossip, and they couldn't undo what they had already done. That sense of helplessness began to twist their minds. Lena, desperate to regain control, turned on her sisters. She accused Marissa of being reckless, of destroying everything they had tried to keep hidden. She accused Dana of being too quiet, too suspicious, as if her silence itself was a confession. Marissa, furious, lashed back, insisting Lena was the one drawing attention with her nervous behavior. Dana, though quiet, began to fantasize about the day when she would no longer have to share Kyle with anyone, when the chaos of her sisters would be gone and only she would remain. It was during these moments of chaos that the idea of silencing outsiders took root. It began with a passing thought, a desperate whisper of possibility, but it quickly grew into something more. The sisters felt cornered, their secret no longer safe, their reputations at risk, and their mother's suspicion closing in like a noose. They convinced themselves that the only way to survive was to eliminate the threat. Their first target was obvious, the friend who betrayed Marissa. That girl had become the center of the spreading rumor, and her voice carried weight among their peers. If she disappeared, the sisters believed the story would fade into mystery rather than fact. They clung to that belief as though it was their only salvation. Kyle, though hesitant, eventually agreed, his paranoia making him desperate to protect himself. The sisters began to plan in whispers, late at night when the rest of the house was quiet. They spoke of how they would lure her away, how they would silence her, how they would erase the danger she represented. It wasn't long before the plan was carried out. The girl vanished one evening, last seen walking home alone. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the town. Search parties scoured the woods, the police knocked on doors, and neighbors whispered about the evil that must be lurking nearby. The sisters watched it all unfold with a mixture of fear and satisfaction. They had done what they thought was necessary, and for a brief moment they believed they were safe again. But safety was an illusion. The investigation quickly revealed signs of a struggle. Evidence pointed to foul play, and though no body was found, the authorities knew she had not simply run away. The town's fear turned into suspicion, and suspicion always looks closest to home. The sisters felt the pressure intensify, and instead of bringing them closer, the crime drove them further apart. They no longer trusted each other to keep quiet. Lena feared Marissa's reckless nature would give them away. Marissa feared Dana's silence would break at the wrong moment. Dana, clutching her journal, began to see herself not as part of a group, but as the only one strong enough to keep the secret alive. The bond that once tied the sisters together was gone. In its place was fear, paranoia, and the realization that one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. What they didn't see was that the walls were already closing in. Investigators were beginning to notice the family's strange behavior. Neighbors remembered the arguments, the late-night walks, the way the sisters hovered around Kyle. The whispers had become more than gossip. They were pieces of a puzzle the authorities were slowly putting together. And the sisters, blind to how much danger they were in, were already plotting their next move. The disappearance of Marissa's friend shook the small town to its core. For days, posters with her picture covered lampposts, convenience store doors, and school hallways. Volunteers walked in long lines through fields and woods, calling her name, their voices carrying through the night air. Police combed ditches, rivers, and abandoned buildings, but every search ended in frustration. The girl was simply gone. The absence of answers only fueled speculation, and speculation quickly turned into fear. Parents warned their children not to walk alone, neighbors began locking their doors earlier, and whispers about dark forces in the community grew louder. The sisters watched the chaos unfold with a sickening mix of relief and terror. Relief, because their plan had worked, she was gone, her voice silenced forever. Terror, because they knew it wouldn't take much for the police to start looking at them. They couldn't undo what they had done, and every hour that passed only tightened the noose around them. Kyle became increasingly paranoid, pacing the house at night, jumping at every knock on the door. He knew the investigators would come eventually, and when they did, he feared he wouldn't be able to hide his guilt. Lena tried to take control, as she always did. She insisted they remain calm, that they act as though nothing was unusual. She reminded her sisters constantly that if they appeared normal, no one would ever suspect them. But her efforts were wasted on Marissa, who spiraled deeper into recklessness. The weight of her betrayal, the careless confession that set everything in motion gnawed at her, and she drowned it in anger. She lashed out at Lena for being controlling and turned her frustration on Dana, mocking her silence and obsession with her journal. Every word she spoke made the cracks between them wider, and every fight left them more vulnerable. Dana retreated further into herself, clutching her journal as though it contained her survival. In it, she documented everything: the arguments, the jealousy, the crime itself. The journal had become her confidant, her way of controlling a world that was spinning out of control. But in reality, it was the most dangerous object in the house. If anyone found it, their secret would unravel instantly. Dana didn't see it that way. She believed the journal was her proof, her version of the truth, something that would one day matter when the others betrayed her. Investigators soon noticed the strange dynamics in the family. When questioned, Lena was cautious, her words careful but uneasy. Marissa snapped too quickly, her defensiveness raising eyebrows. Dana barely spoke at all, her silence unsettling to those who questioned her. Kyle tried to appear detached, but his nervous movements betrayed him. The police couldn't prove anything yet, but their instincts told them the family knew more than they were admitting. They began watching the house more closely, noting comings and goings, hoping for a slip that would reveal the truth. The sisters sensed the attention. Their neighbors watched them differently now, their looks sharper, their conversations quieter when they walked past. The house that once held their secret was now a prison of suspicion. Nights were the worst. Every sound outside made them think the police had arrived. Every creak of the floor made them suspect one of them had broken under the weight and confessed. The fear ate at them, driving them further apart, twisting them into enemies who shared the same roof. One night, Lena woke to find Marissa gone. Panic set in immediately. She searched the house and eventually found her sister outside, standing in the yard, staring into the darkness. Marissa confessed she couldn't sleep, that the guilt was too heavy, that she was tired of living in fear. Lena begged her to hold on, to stay silent, but the damage was already done. Marissa was unstable, unpredictable, and Lena knew it was only a matter of time before she made another mistake. From that night on, Lena watched her constantly, but suspicion lingered in her heart. If Marissa threatened their survival again, Lena wasn't sure she could stop herself from doing something drastic. Meanwhile, Dana's obsession deepened. She began withdrawing from both her sisters, spending more and more time alone with Kyle. In her mind, the others were weak liabilities who would eventually ruin everything. She saw herself as the only one truly devoted to him, the only one strong enough to protect their secret. Her journal reflected this shift. The entries became darker, filled with thoughts of betrayal, punishment, and loyalty. She wrote about how the weakest links had to be cut away, how only the strongest could survive the storm closing in around them. As the investigation dragged on, police uncovered signs of a struggle near the wooded area where the missing girl was last seen. Broken branches, scattered belongings, and faint traces of blood confirmed foul play. The community's fear turned into outrage, and pressure mounted on investigators to find those responsible. The sisters realized then that their illusion of safety was gone. The police weren't searching for a runaway anymore. They were hunting a predator. Kyle's paranoia reached its breaking point. He began talking about leaving town, about disappearing before the police put the pieces together. Lena opposed the idea, arguing that running would make them guilty in everyone's eyes. Marissa, reckless as ever, liked the idea of escape, but she didn't trust Kyle to protect her. Dana, however, clung to him tighter, determined that wherever he went, she would follow, even if it meant leaving her sisters behind. Their arguments over what to do became violent, their words sharp, their emotions boiling over until the house felt like a battlefield. Then came the neighbor's testimony that would shift everything. One evening, a woman across the street reported seeing Lena sneaking out of the house late at night, carrying something heavy. The police took the tip seriously. They began watching the family more closely, circling in like wolves. They were waiting for a mistake, for one of them to crack under the mounting pressure. The sisters didn't know it yet, but the investigation was closing in faster than they could control. Inside the house, suspicion had destroyed any sense of loyalty. Lena no longer trusted Marissa. Marissa hated both of her sisters, and Dana began to imagine a future where she would rid herself of them altogether. The secret that once bound them had poisoned their lives completely. The crime they thought would silence their problems had only created new ones, problems they couldn't escape. The town held its breath, waiting for answers, while the sisters tore each other apart behind closed doors. The missing girl had not been found, but the shadows of her disappearance loomed larger every day. Each knock at the door could have been the end. Each word spoken too loudly could have been the final crack. And as investigators circled closer, the sisters' once unbreakable bond had transformed into a cage, locking them in with their guilt, their fear, and their growing hatred of one another. The collapse of the family came faster than anyone expected. The house that once felt like a fortress for the sisters' secret was now surrounded by suspicion, whispers, and the growing presence of police who circled like predators waiting for their prey to stumble. The missing girl's case had become a storm that swept across the small town, and the family was at the center of it. Every move they made, every word they spoke, seemed to pull them deeper into the quicksand of suspicion. Lena tried to hold everything together. She told herself that if they just stayed calm, if they kept their stories straight, the police would eventually move on to someone else. But inside, she knew the walls were closing in. She noticed how the investigators lingered on their porch a little longer each visit, how their questions grew sharper, how their eyes darted between the sisters as though they could see the cracks forming. She felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on her chest every time she breathed. Marissa was unraveling quickly. The guilt of betraying their secret in the first place, of sparking the chain of events that led to their friend's disappearance, had hollowed her out. She slept little, her eyes bloodshot and heavy, her words quick and defensive whenever questioned. She could feel her sisters watching her, blaming her for everything, and she hated them for it. Her bitterness seeped into every conversation, her anger boiling just beneath the surface. She started to speak recklessly again, hinting at things she should not. her words dangerous enough to draw suspicion if anyone listened closely. Lena watched her spiral, and the thought of silencing her sister became less unthinkable with each passing day. Dana remained quiet, her silence becoming more dangerous than words. She poured everything into her journal, filling its pages with confessions, twisted thoughts, and her own version of the truth. She saw herself as the only one truly loyal to Kyle, the only one willing to do whatever it took to protect him. Her entries grew darker, filled with fantasies of removing her sisters from the picture entirely. In her mind, they were liabilities, weak links who would eventually destroy everything. She saw betrayal in every glance, weakness in every word. The journal, clutched tightly to her chest, became her lifeline, the object that carried her obsession and her plan for survival. Kyle himself was breaking under the pressure. He avoided the police as much as possible, his paranoia so obvious that even strangers noticed. His once confident demeanor had turned jittery, his movements quick and nervous, his words clumsy when forced to speak. He wanted to run, to disappear before the police uncovered the truth. He begged the sisters to leave town with him, but Lena refused, convinced that fleeing would be their downfall. The tension between him and the sisters boiled over nightly, and the house became a place of shouting, slamming doors, and whispered threats. The police received the first real break in the case when a neighbor came forward. She claimed she saw Lena sneaking out of the house late at night carrying something heavy in her arms. The sight haunted her, and when she heard about the missing girl, she put the pieces together in her mind. To the investigators, it was the first piece of tangible suspicion, the first hint that this family might be involved in something darker than anyone had imagined. They began surveillance on the house, waiting for a mistake. The mistake came sooner than expected. One evening, Dana left her journal on the kitchen table by accident. Their mother, desperate for answers, found it. She flipped through the pages in horror, her hands trembling as she read the dark confessions. There were no names, but the meaning was clear. It spoke of betrayal, of silencing threats, of loyalty to Kyle at all costs. It even hinted at the missing girl, written in chillingly vague detail that revealed enough to confirm her worst fears. Their mother confronted Dana, her voice shaking with disbelief, but Dana only grabbed the journal back, her silence colder than any denial could have been. Terrified, the mother went to the police. She didn't hand over the journal immediately, but her words gave investigators exactly what they needed to push harder. Within days, they obtained a warrant, and the family's secrets began spilling out piece by piece. Items were seized from the house, and investigators pored over them for evidence. The journal, eventually taken from Dana, became the centerpiece of the case, its pages a chilling roadmap of obsession and crime. Faced with mounting pressure, the sisters began to turn on each other. Lena tried to shift blame onto Marissa, painting her as reckless and dangerous. Marissa lashed out, insisting Lena had orchestrated everything. Dana, silent for so long, finally broke, but not in the way her sisters expected. She confessed everything, not out of guilt but out of pride. She spoke coldly, describing the betrayal, the fear, and the choices they made as though they were inevitable. She detailed the disappearance of the girl, giving investigators the evidence they needed to finally piece the case together. Her confession sealed their fate. The sisters were arrested along with Kyle, and the town erupted in shock. People who once waved at them on the street now stared in horror, unable to comprehend how something so twisted could have been happening behind closed doors. The family that seemed ordinary was revealed as the center of one of the darkest crimes the town had ever seen. The trial was a spectacle. The sisters sat side by side, but the unity they once claimed was gone. Lena tried to portray herself as the protector, forced into terrible choices by others. Marissa collapsed under the weight of her own guilt, her testimony erratic and emotional. Dana remained eerily calm, her obsession with Kyle still evident in every word she spoke. Kyle, desperate to save himself, attempted to distance his role, but the evidence was overwhelming. The journal, the witness statements, and Dana's confession painted a picture of a family consumed by secrets, jealousy, and violence. In the end, the verdict was inevitable. They were each sentenced for their roles in the crime, their lives reduced to prison walls and whispered memories of what they had once shared. The sisters, once bound together by a forbidden secret, were now enemies bound by chains, their bond destroyed by betrayal and fear. Kyle, the center of it all, was condemned alongside them, his life forever marked by the choices that had dragged them all into darkness. The town never forgot. The story of the three sisters and their stepbrother became a chilling tale passed down in whispers, a reminder of how quickly secrets can consume, how jealousy can destroy, and how love twisted into obsession can end in tragedy. The posters of the missing girl were eventually taken down, but the memory of her disappearance lingered in every shadowed street corner, every glance exchanged in silence. For the sisters, the story that began with a forbidden thrill ended in betrayal, prison, and a legacy of horror that would haunt them forever.